Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at gcnlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Are you all frozen? Man, it's cold here in Missouri. No kidding. Yesterday it was about 0. Today, about 0. And I just feel so bad for these animals who are outside. Patrick is engineering the broadcast in Minnesota. If you'd like to call us, we'd love to hear from you. Call the number 866-582-9933, 866-582-9933. Rich Sheben's with us. Welcome, Rich Scheben.
Well, thank you, Vincent Finelli. It is always a pleasure.
You know, I wanted to ask you, Rich. We've had our heat. We have 3 settings on our outdoor wood furnace, and that's the reason I'm mentioning this is Rich Scheben heats with wood. We heat with wood. We have an outside wood furnace. Rich Scheben has an indoor large stove in his kitchen where he eats his cabin. But I just want to chat for a couple minutes about heating. Well, our wood stove heats about 400 gallons of water. And that water is a reservoir of hot water, about 170 to 180 degrees. And it circulates through underground pipes into the house. And the standard heating system in the house, we have 2 heat exchangers, kind of like car radiators, if you will. And they're heated with this water, this hot water. And then the air is blown across them, and then the heat comes out through the ductwork, kind of like if you have a heat pump. But there's another radiator in the ductwork, and that radiator is warmed by the outside wood furnace. And we can set that wood furnace to 3 speeds in terms of circulation speed of the water coming from the wood stove to the house, low, medium, and high. And in the summertime, we have it set to low. Right now, we have it set to medium. And with it set to medium and running the water temperature to about 178 degrees, maximum temperature, between 168 and 178 degrees, we are able to heat our house to 62 degrees. 62. Now, that's after we've taken some, what I would consider pretty, moderate measures. We have covered up the glass with sheets and curtains, the doors covered up with sheets, closed off rooms that we're not using, closed off heat registers that we're not using, not heating the studio and the area of the farmhouse that is right next to the studio. So we're doing all the things that we can, I think, to lower the amount of wood consumption that we have been using and save on heat. Okay, so we're doing those things. Now, during the times when the sun can shine in the windows, of course, the curtains are open and the sun can come in and help warm up the house. But we're only able to get it up to 62, 63 degrees. Now, we could take more extreme measures and we could turn the circulator pump to high, burn more wood, but we haven't done that. We're just wearing more layers. Got a lot of layers on right now in the studio. But my question to you, Rich Scheben, is are you able to heat your house without doing any modifications at all, or are you finding it's a little cooler inside than it would normally be, this winter meaning?
Well, so far in the past month, we have had probably single digits for average temperature. And having wood heat, as you know, which you just discussed, is so much warmer than conventional heats like propane or natural gas or electricity, not to mention that it's a lot cheaper. But that dry warmth you get from the stove, there's nothing second it's second to none regarding the functionality or efficacy of actual heat. Now, that being said, there are some things that we do. For example, we know people who complain about their heating bill, and yet they have pretty curtains all around their house. Well, pretty curtains doesn't have functionality. I like thick drapes on my windows, and I have no problem having half of them closed during the winter months, even when we're inside the cabin. So there are ways that you can cheat the cold, and we don't really fight the seasons. We take advantage of them. For example, I leave my food on the basement floor by the front French doors and let the cold seep through to keep my food at a temperature of 30 to 38 degrees. So, again, we don't fight seasons. We look at seasonality as a benefit. You know, for example, let's say things got really difficult here in Montana. We could dig a hole in a northern slope and store food for 6 months out of the year quite comfortably. So, you know, that's the way I look at things. I look at it as I take advantage of the present system, the present weather, the present seasonality, and that's how I live, Vince.
Okay, what I did, I do the same thing. And when you talked about drapes, in the studio I have some drapes that, heck, you know, these drapes are probably drapes that my mom and dad had from the 1960s. I'm not exaggerating. And we've kept them. My mom made them, and they're lined, and they're very heavy. And they're kind of a traditional material that, you know, it wasn't a 1960s fad that came and went. These were like traditional designs, and they're still very, very nice drapes. And they don't look weird. So I have them in the studio, and my mom had her drapes that she made in her bedroom, and so they're lined, and we're doing exactly the same thing, opening the windows, letting the sun in, closing the windows when the sun goes down to keep the heat in. But I have been experimenting with our non-contact thermometer, and this is like a gun, if you will. It's shaped sort of like a toy pistol almost. It wouldn't be mistaken for a toy pistol. It would be mistaken for something else. I'm not sure what. But you hold this in your hand, in one hand, and it has a little trigger, and it's lightweight plastic. And it is an infrared type measuring device. It has a digital display. So you can aim it at a wall, and you can read the temperature in centigrade or Fahrenheit of that wall, or the ceiling, or of a car engine, or the side of a house, or the roof, or, you know, many, many objects, without physically contacting those items you want to measure the temperature of. So I went around the house yesterday, and I was using this non-contact thermometer from a couple feet away, and I aimed it at the walls, and I'd get temperatures like 60. Well, let's say 60 degrees, and then I measured the temperature of the doors. We have steel doors, like most of you have steel doors with some glass in them. We have that. And they're insulated with foam on the inside. And the steel doors were about 48 degrees, the steel part. Then I measured the glass part, and the glass part was, well, let's say 40 degrees. So what I learned from that little experiment was where the heat's going. So the heat loss is greatest at the glass, second greatest at the steel, and and the best insulator is the walls. So that's what I learned. So I'm going to concentrate on reducing the heat loss of the glass, because I have a feeling that these temperatures that we're seeing, these wild temperature swings of 40 degrees during a 24 or 36 or 48 hour period, I don't think they're going to go away. I think we're going to see this from now on. And I'm talking about in the summer, these wild temperature swings. I'm talking about like California right now is looking at, are they in the next drought? They haven't had very much rain for a year. That's a problem. So they thought the problem was over. They got a deluge of rain and it looked like things were going to be fine in California. Then they went a year without rain. Now, the wildfires. That's the kind of thing that's happening. So I'm concerned about these wild temperature swings, wild weather swings, violent climate change, we might want to call it. So because of that, I've stored for years, and I thought this was coming. So I've been storing oriented strand board, commonly called OSB. And OSB was available for about $7.98 a sheet, 4x8 sheets. And what I'm going to do is cut it to fit windows. And I'm going to drill holes in the window frames so that I can mount each one of these boards that I'm going to paint to help protect them. They've been kept in the garage, but I'm going to paint them to match the house. And with about maybe 10 screws or so, I can screw them in to protect the windows. And I'll number each one of them so I know where it goes, because it's going to be really difficult to have the exact same screw hole lineup. So I don't want to keep putting new holes in the window frames. And that's my plan to protect against these extreme temperatures should we see them again. Unfortunately, right now it's just too darn cold to do that. But those are the things that I've been thinking about. I've also been thinking about the plastic sheets that you can put over windows, tack a frame around them and use a hair dryer to stretch the plastic so you make like a storm window on the inside. I'm thinking about that too. The only problem with that is cats and dogs, and I'm sure they're going to bump into it and tear them up if they can reach them. So that's the concern with that. But then there's plexiglass, which is pretty darn expensive. Then there's glass. So all of these solutions are going to cost some amount of money, but it's better than freezing to death. And that has happened. People have frozen to death. I know of a family in Virginia. We had an ice storm years ago, and the family decided they would all get together in one house, which made a lot of sense, except for the grandfather. The grandfather said, you know what, I'm going to stay at the farm, make sure everything's okay at the farm. And when the ice storm was over, the family went to check on the grandfather. They'd frozen to death. Very sad story. That's true. Rich Shealy and I will be right back after these few short commercial announcements. Rich, you're going to go feed some animals and take care of animals, right? Man, it's really cold. Right here, it's cold in Montana. Rich Sheaben's with us. Off-Grid Montana.com. Offgridmontana.com. Rich, you have any comments you'd like to make?
Regarding which topic? Fighting the cold?
Well, yeah. Well, it's a challenge. It's a full-time job.
It is a challenge, but I'll be honest with you, Vince. When I came to Montana, I knew exactly what I was getting into, and I personally love the Four Seasons. I was down in Florida a few weeks ago visiting a buddy of mine, checking out his new house and all this stuff, and it is gorgeous. There's butterflies. I saw a possum. You know me and animals and nature, so I noticed these things. A few exotic birds. We did a little fishing. I mean, it was fantastic. But personally, for me, for my lifestyle, for the variety that I enjoy, for the adventure that I came here for. Now, granted, I'm pushing 60, and my adventure years might be in the fourth quarter, but I think that if I didn't have the Four Seasons, I would be bored. So I enjoy, to me, winter, even though there's certain chores you have to do, like going outside and breaking the ice so the critters can drink. You know, my personal critters, my goats and my Great Pyrenees guard dogs and all this stuff. I mean, you got to fight the grizzly bears in the fall. I mean, there's challenges that revolve with seasonality, but it makes life interesting. And winter's also a time to relax a little bit because the days are longer and stuff like that. And technology's making things a little easier too. You know, even though I try really hard to fight the new technology, there's some things that have made life easier. Like, for example, we've had for the last year we've had Wi-Fi. You know, years ago, everybody here in Montana, especially in Northwest Montana, complained about wasting their money on a Verizon subscription. Pardon me, because they couldn't get a signal. Well, now you can get a signal in your home or any place that has Wi-Fi, and you don't even need to pay the monthly subscription if you have a smartphone. So there's certain things that you can do that have made life easier for living rurally, and the technology. Some things I just use Mother Nature and common sense and logic. When you live with a wood cook stove, I have water, hot water, on demand, whether it be the reservoir or my teapots on the wood stove. And I go outside, and I literally, even when it's 0 degrees, I will pour hot water in my animals' bowls. And that will give me hours before I have to go out there and break ice. So there's little things you do that makes life simpler for us and the critters, and, it's all good.
Yeah, now, you are in charge of your destiny. So, for example, if you want hot water, you've got to split wood ahead of time. You've got to put it in the wood stove ahead of time. You've got to light the fire ahead of time. And you've got to fill that pot ahead of time. So it takes preparation to live the way you live and the way we live. And we'll talk a little bit more about how I got some calls over the yesterday. I got some calls about people who had some concerns. We'll talk a little bit more about that and how this cold weather has affected them. We've got George. George in New Hampshire, welcome. You're on with Rich Scheben and me.
Hi, Rich.
Hey.
Haven't talked to you.
Hi, George.
I just wanted to quickly say a couple of points I've learned to help. I found instead of using the plastic sheeting inside, I use the bubble wrap that you see a lot of times packages come wrapped in. And I find that the larger bubble pattern that people like to pop a lot of times, if you just contour it to the square of the windows, it can be reused over and over again. But I notice when the sun hits those bubbles, there's like a thermal effect where I notice the room warms up. It lets light in. It gives you a certain modicum of privacy. But at the same time, you can leave a portion of the upper part of the window not with the wrap, for the simple reason you can look outside, you can enjoy a view, or you can see somebody coming up the walk. But it not only lets in light, but it gives a certain thermal efficiency boost to the windows you have.
I love it.
And the cats won't get
at
it.
Yeah. Interesting you say that. Our daughter got a letter from her neighborhood civic association, and she was going to be fined because one of her window screens wasn't right in the front of her house. It wasn't the same as all the other windows. Actually, I guess it was missing a window screen. And she said, "When'd you take those pictures?" That was before I bought the house. She didn't have that problem, but yeah. Rich Sheben's with us, offgridmontana.com. George is with us, both USA preparers instructors. Rich, you left New York City to move to Montana. George, I was going to ask you, have you ever considered leaving New Hampshire, where it's freezing cold as well, to move to another place, maybe west?
I have been, because from what I've been able to find out, that we may be moving into a mini ice age, where I believe our scientists are saying that it could last as long as maybe 40 years, and the Russian scientists say it could last more like about 200 years. And most of us who are like 50 years old or older, like us, we can remember times when the winters were different, the summers were different. You'd have a real spring, say in April, at least up in New England, we would. Now I've noticed it doesn't seem like summer starts now until almost the end of June, the beginning of July, because we get that cold, damp weather. And I think, like you say, this is going to be a cycle that may make it go from what it is today, which when I was over the holidays, I was down with my mom. The weather girl said that normally for that part of December, last month was normally like, I'll say, 38 degrees. Well, it was 0 degrees outside, and that's Fahrenheit. So for us, that's why I have considered, because I have a feeling that I have a problem with a frozen pipe right now, and I get a feeling this is a portent of things to come in the future.
George, I've mentioned on the air that you are really on top of things that are happening, and you're a very, very bright guy. And I was chatting with Rich Scheben last night, and we were talking about exactly that, this mini ice age. And Rich, you're concerned about it. I'm concerned about it. And I mentioned to Rich last night that I've been gearing up for this although it hadn't been reported as such. As a farmer, I can feel these things coming. I don't mean necessarily with my gut, but with my gut combined with my observations. When I put those together, I can feel these things coming. And that's why I bought the OSB for the windows. That's why I'm thinking about, modifying our heating system. So yesterday and the day before, I was sitting down with pencil and paper, thinking about how I can redesign the heating system to become more efficient, change the flow, and the valving of it. And one of the problems is some of the parts that we buy are just crappy. And these Chinese parts, for example, I have ball valves, BALL valves, and when it's a full flow valve that you can just turn a lever, and it doesn't have like a handle that you turn and turn and turn. It's just you turn this valve 90 degrees, the handle 90 degrees, and it will either let the water flow or it will stop the water from flowing. And these are stainless steel insert ball valves, and I went to slow down the flow in one area of the house so I could increase the water flow for heat in another area, and the darn thing is leaking all over. And so I can't fix it right now. It won't leak if I have the valve shut off or if I have it wide open, but I can't put it somewhere in the middle without it leaking and there's no adjustment. I can't fix it without replacing it. So here we may think that we've done a good job and bought the best quality that we can buy, best value, and find out later that these parts are failing. That's another thing. So we need to design simplicity into our solutions, in my opinion. Rich Scheben, your thoughts?
Well, I just want to make a couple of opinions on what we talked about regarding the so-called global warming, which is obviously a big farce. But whether it be an ice age or whatever, you got to remember a lot of this stuff. The powers that be, unfortunately, there's 8 people in the world that have a higher net worth than half of the world combined. There's over 100, and I'm being very conservative with this number, over 100 patents on weather manipulation, run by the Monsantos of the world, run by the Rothschilds of the world, and other people as well. So you have to ask yourself, what is actually going on, and is this a phenomenon that is a natural phenomenon because of the solar system, the galaxy, planet X, sunspots? I mean, it's almost, you can almost make the analogy of people who live on the West Coast. They've been hearing forever, the ocean's going to fall in. And look where you live in Missouri, in Tornado Alley, and, the ocean's going to go all the way up to, the U.S. is going to break with that fault, and the ocean's going to go up to the Great Lakes. People have been hearing stuff for a lot of years. And you have to, is there any way that the average Joe can sort through the propaganda to say, this has actually happened, this is actually legitimate, this has credibility, this has validity? I don't know. And I think this is why we have to continue to live our lives and help out as many people as we can. But in the meantime, we can't worry about too many things that we can't control. And that's my philosophy. So
right, let me give you an example of something that we believed. I'm sure many of us believe that this is true. But here's the first time I've actually seen it in print. Daily Mail says, exclusive. The secret deals, I'm reading the headlines now, exclusive. The secret deals which shaped our lives. How big businesses got together to make sure your light bulb wouldn't last. Would not last. You'd always want a newer car, and you'd always go back on a diet. And it says, the deals that made the world. This author reveals how a secret meeting in Geneva in 1932 created a plan to make the light bulb obsolete. He also writes how one pharmaceuticals executive's dream became a reality, after the pharmaceutical industry began marketing drugs to healthy people. Now, the great light bulb conspiracy is there's a company that made the world's longest-lasting light bulb. It was created in 1901, 117 years ago. It has continued to burn continuously for 117 years. We don't know when it will fail, but it's been running ever since then. Now, my dad told me a story, and I have a feeling that George may have heard this as well, since you're in the Northeast, George. My dad told me that there was a light company, a light bulb manufacturer. I'm talking about standard screw-in light bulbs, the kind of things that Hillary Clinton made obsolete, the incandescent screw-in light bulb that we all grew up with. Well, my dad told me that in the early 20s or 30s, General Electric was at war with another light bulb company called Mazda, spelled the same exact way as the car. Probably the same company as the car company, Mazda of Japan. And what my dad said was Mazda was making a darn good light bulb. It worked really well, and it was less expensive. And I even have an antique display, a light bulb fixture that's it's cast in metal, iron, and it's spray painted gold from the era that it's original, and it says Mazda on it for the light bulb display. I guess probably at a hardware store where you'd buy these bulbs. Well, General Electric and Mazda were in this war, and General Electric was being beaten by Mazda because Mazda had a really good light bulb that lasted a pretty long time, and it was less expensive. So people were buying Mazda light bulbs. And as my dad told the story, General Electric got together with the power company. And what they did, General Electric then changed their design of the light bulb to make it such that it would work at 130 volts rather than the standard 115, 117, or 120 volts. And it could sustain a higher voltage. Then it released these light bulbs to the consumers. And then after that, it got the power company, it worked in collusion with the power company to increase the voltage, something that very few customers would be monitoring. And the Mazda light bulbs, which were designed for 115, 117 volts, would burn out. And people would say, these darn Mazda bulbs are junk, they're no good. Mm-hmm. That's the collusion that my dad told me about General Electric versus Mazda. George, your thoughts?
I
Have you heard that?
Be surprised. I'd just like to say this, if I could, just aside, Vincent. You mentioned something about how you wanted to control the flow, I guess, of the heat in your house with that handle there with the valve there.
Yeah.
You know what I found? The simple way I did it, and I'm not trying to get off subject. This was just one of the things I wanted to share with you and the audience, and Rich, is the vents where the heating ducts are. I found that I opened them up, and they're like a wooden box inside. And the air bounces around inside, and a lot of the heat goes into that wooden box before it comes out. It's not the most efficient way to direct it. So what I did was I got some aluminum pie pans, and I cut them. I used some simple garden gloves I find would help with some of the scratches, and I'd shape it like a shell that you might see on a place where an orchestra would be playing outdoors for some summer evening, like the Pops in Boston on the Esplanade. And what I did was I shaped it, and I'm sure you could do it with a piece of cardboard or plastic. You could put aluminum foil around a certain portion to tape it. And I found that I directed it so that it was like that shell effect. I noticed it would reflect the heat out. As far as the light bulbs are concerned, I know that Edison wasn't really considered. Tesla and Edison worked together for a short time, and I know Edison wasn't. I think he was into that New World Order way back when. But what I mean to say is that there's a lot of suppressed technology that Tesla, he died in poverty, and they stole a lot of his plans.
George, you mentioned Nikola Tesla, and he invented some really neat things. He was a proponent of alternating current, He didn't invent the light bulb per se, but he did invent fluorescent style light bulbs 40 years before the industry invented light bulbs. He worked with X-rays, he worked with radio, remote control, of course the electric motor. And an interesting thing about alternating current is Thomas Edison was a proponent of direct current. Nikola Tesla and General Electric, Westinghouse, I should say, were proponents of alternating current. And the advantage of alternating current is that you could transport it long distances, where DC, or direct current, you could not easily transport it over long distances. And so Edison was a proponent of direct current, and as an opponent of alternating current, one of the things Edison what he did was to show how dangerous alternating current is he would electrocute animals like elephants. He would literally electrocute animals in the public to show how dangerous it was. And from what I've read, he's the guy that produced the electric chair, Thomas Edison. Yeah. Any comments, George?
Well, there's a lot of lost technology. And I remember that they said there was a man, I believe he was out in Hawaii, and he had the ability to move these very large slabs of stone that, let's just say, you need a heck of a powerful machine to do it. And what he would do is that when something would be delivered to his property, he'd have it placed in a certain spot until he was ready to use it. And he would send everybody away, and he jealously guarded, this is like within the last probably 50 years, and they said he'd send everybody away, and he wouldn't reveal how he did it, but he would stack them in such a way when he was building that they couldn't figure out how he was doing it. And they said this young kid happened to spy on him one day, and he saw the man holding two cones, shaped things, and apparently he was using either some type of sound or electricity in concert with these cones, as well as the child could describe it. And he saw him levitate these stones and basically set them on top of each other in his building. And like I said, that's one lost piece of technology. And I even was told, Vin and Rich, that there was a man in southern New Hampshire or somewhere down that way, and he was an engineer, and he started playing around with his heating system. And he got this idea of having these two discs rubbed together in a fashion that produced heat. And somehow he managed to direct the heat. He was heating his home with this, and I guess he told a couple of people about it. And as the story went, this is the way I heard it from somebody who befriended this man's son. He says the two government men showed up. They confiscated a number of things, and they said, look, you can keep your heating system, but you keep your mouth shut. You don't go any further with this, because apparently this really would have had a major impact on the oil industry, which we know the oil industry doesn't want us to turn to a lot of alternatives that would basically leave them in the dust for as far as, the utilizing of technologies that could free people up from having to be, spiritual, servants subservient to the utility companies.
George, you've heard the story about the 100-mile-per-gallon car, right? Back in the 1930s or so, that the oil companies gobbled up that invention? Yeah. Is that something that... Go ahead. I'm sorry.
We only have I don't mean to take up too much of your time either, because I know you and Rich have a lot to cover, but I'll just say there were 75-mile-an-hour carburetors and Pintos that got out of the factory, and when people went for their warranty oil change, the carburetor was replaced. No further information. Hey, you guys take care. God bless. You too, George.
Thanks so much, George. Rich and I'll be right back. Everyone all set? Cocked, locked, hour number 2 of USA Prepares. If you'd like to give us a call, 866-582-9933 during the hours of 9 to 11 Central Time. Rich Sheben's with us, offgridmontana.com. Rich, I was reading an article about, this planned obsolescence idea. And it's Daily Mail. And it goes on to say how Chevrolet boss made you want a new car every year. Continues to say planned obsolescence took a step further decades later during the Cold War when businesses went after marketing techniques deeply rooted in human psychology. And so by the 1950s, the CEO of General Motors found a way to upgrade a model of a car by making changes so novel and attractive that it would create an amount of dissatisfaction with the past models as compared to the new one, meaning buyers wouldn't wait for the old one to stop working before wanting a new one. And so the idea was to use marketing to implant in the buyer's mind that there was something better than what they had just bought. And they would do things like, they would change the color scheme, they would improve the radio a little bit, just a little bit. And the customers would want the new, slightly better model. And it was at that point when we started wanting to keep up with the Joneses as it was described. And what I found most of us here at USA Prepares are doing and have done is we don't do that. We're not worried about the Joneses. We're not worried about what other people have done just because the masses are buying new cars. I look at people driving new cars and I think, wow, I can't believe it. Why would they do that? Why would they buy a new car and then 2 years later buy another new car and then 2 years later buy another one? Well, lease them. How do you ever get ahead doing that? And you can't. You can't. Do you have any comments about that, Rich? Planned obsolescence.
Well, yeah, it doesn't matter if it's corporations, the Federal Reserve, or central banks. Basically what they do is they look at soft data, surveys, consumer confidence like the VIX, focus groups, basically manipulate data with subjective emotional opinion from the elite to see how far they can turn reality into fantasy. This is one of the reasons why I do these shows, is because ideas and solutions have to come from the bottom up. The corporations are fleecing America. And we have a fascist system where they're too big to fail and too big to jail, where the taxpayers are basically bailing them out. And that's why, you guys had that conversation with George and yourself and talking about ideas and solutions for the little guy. Look at GE. You mentioned GE. They don't even pay taxes. I don't think they've paid taxes for a decade. So when we look at increased GDP and all the economists talking about how we need increased GDP, that's not, for the bottom 93%, that is no longer correlated to happiness. Okay, what we need is to get out of debt and have a savings account. That's of significance. What we need are heroes. America, we need heroes. Whether you're part of the UN and all these secret vehicles and armies being hidden around almost every state. I read about it in Wyoming and Texas and Maryland and West Virginia. People are coming across all these hidden UN vehicles, all these secret technologies for power and energy that you guys were talking about. Big pharma. I mean, you really think because they have a fancy mission statement they're here to help the little guy? No, they're not. They're here they have an addiction to power, money, and control. So we live in a state where we have no representation. I'm talking about the bottom 93%. We have no restitution. We have no protection under the law. And I mentioned this this article. It's in the book, and I'll continue to mention it. Big pharma criminality no longer a conspiracy theory. Bribery, fraud, price fixing now matter of public record. We're now seeing GlaxoSmithKline pleading guilty to bribery, fraud, and other crimes, according to U.S. federal investigators, which half have probably been paid off. They've been routinely bribing doctors with luxury vacations and speaking gigs while fabricating drug safety data and lying to the FDA. They have been caught defrauding Medicare and Medicaid out of billions of dollars. Now, this is published data in the public domain. This isn't me making this up. This has been published, okay? Think about the fact that they have defrauded the American people out of Medicare and Medicaid. Now, most Americans are forced to put into Medicare, disability / Social Security. I should say Medicare / Social Security / disability, okay? They're all connected. They're basically all one fund. We've been forced into this, okay? Some people volunteered, but most Americans have been forced into this. Well, if you have one company defrauding the American people out of billions of dollars, how do you expect to run a capitalistic system that's run off of supply and demand and free markets? That's exactly what we don't have. We need heroes. We need whistleblowers to come forward and to talk about how the bottom 93% are being fleeced because we have no restitution and no protection under the law. You know, you look at who runs the system. The central banks, the IMF, the BIS, Bank for International Settlements, the World Bank, the UN, the CFR, Council for Foreign Relations, basically the 6 big banks and Deutsche Bank, which is most of these banks are broke. And when you look at some of the names under the UN regarding ownership and control, it's things like World Bank, Rothschild Bank of London, Berlin, Federal Reserve, Bank of Paris, Bank of Italy, Bank of Hamburg, Amsterdam, Chase Manhattan, Rockefeller Bank of New York, Goldman Sachs. This is just a small portion of the names who owns / runs the UN. And they make it very clear that they want to control our armies or lands, food, regs, ports, transportation, people, freedom, liberty. You know, people, what we really need to do is have very difficult conversations that's based on truth and objective facts. And that's why I always say stand for principle. We need to have the same rules, laws, and accountability for everyone in American soil, and we don't. It's separated by aristocracy versus serfs. And then for the bottom 93%, we're being distracted, dumbed down, and divided by race, gender, sex, religion, ideology, generation. This is why there's so much race baiting and sex baiting and this baiting and that baiting on the mainstream media. Their job, see, when you hear fake news is, they like saying fake news because what it really means is that they're bought and paid for. What it really means when you take it to the next level is the people who are reading the teleprompters on the mainstream media are owned. They're owned. And there's only 5 companies that control all of the mainstream media. And that includes production companies and publishing companies, not just TV, newspapers, magazines, radio, etc. So their job is to sway public opinion, to hold on to the narrative, to control the memes, talking points, and microphone, and manufacture perception, pity, guilt, and ideology. You know, Dr. Ben Carson said it perfectly. When you are politically correct, you turn minorities into victims. And this is what the plan, this is the divide and conquer strategy. It's to turn the United States of America into the divided groups of America. And this is why they play group identity politics, which they love to label as identity politics so people don't realize what's been happening to them. This is the home run pitch. And this is why they use media propaganda, subliminal messaging, professional wordsmith, Hegelian dialectic. Divide and conquer strategy does nothing but lower the bars of standards and expectations for getting a job and keeping a job. Why are immigrants here? Why do they come here? They come here so they can control their own destiny, for freedom, for liberty. You don't empower a nation or a group by lowering the bars of standards and expectations for getting a job and keeping a job. It's degrading. It's disrespecting. It eliminates any opportunity for synergy, hence divide and conquer. So when you insult the work ethic, the ability and the intelligence of all these people shoved into these groups, it's only meant to make the populace submissive and break their will. So that the powers that be can demonize, discredit, and delegitimize through all mediums. And this is why they love to use satire for a lot of their tools, especially in late-night talk shows. because they want to be able to call somebody a controversial, extremist, racist, bigot, sexist, misogynist, homophobe, conspiracy theorist, intolerant, violent hater with an anti in front of every name and an ism, ist, and phobia on the back of every name. Lowering the bars of standards and expectations does nothing more than destroy America by rewarding mediocrity. And the bottom 93% doesn't have a chance because we have no representation and no protection under the law. So for us to use ingenuity, productivity, and innovation and knowledge, it's getting tougher and tougher to do. And that's one of the reasons I live off-grid. That's one of the reasons I try so hard to think of ideas and solutions for the little guy and stick up for what used to be the middle class, which is now the poor/middle class, or as I refer to it, the bottom 93%. Well, Vince, thanks for letting me rant. I will hand the microphone back to you.
I was wondering how you did in English composition. I'll bet you did really well, but I have a feeling your teacher criticized you for not following instructions. Now, I'm not saying we had any instructions, because I've been criticized for in my English papers that I wrote at the college level. I would get really good marks, but I would get a lot of points taken off for failure to follow instructions. Did you have the same problem?
You know what? In school, and I talk about this in the book, I was so bored. I was just so bored. I just dreamed about being in the outdoors and doing my mountain man thing, and here we are.
Yeah. All right, we'll be right back. We'll talk about planned obsolescence. I've got some comments. Rich Sheben's with us. Offgridmontana.com. And if you'd like to find out more about his book, One New York Man's Journey to Off-Grid Living in Montana, just go to offgridmontana.com. Or you can buy it on Amazon right now. Rich, planned obsolescence. So during the commercial break, I looked at something that I think is a ridiculous design. Back in the 1950s, my mother had a washing machine. It was in the basement. And the repair guy kept coming out. I believe it was a General Electric. And it was a front-load washing machine. It leaked out the front door, all over the floor, on a regular basis. And they couldn't fix it. They kept replacing the seal, the seal on the door. And it would leak. Now, this was the forerunner of the now popular front-load washing machines. I do not have one. And I never plan on buying one because it's a ridiculous design. Water's going to come out the front door. It's just physics, okay? Well, I looked up the average price of washing machines. If you get a top loader, the kind we have, and my favorite brand would be the Whirlpool brand. I think it's the best design. Between $300 and $500 is the average price in America right now for a brand new top-loading washing machine, $300 to $500. Now, a front loader runs $600 to $1,200 average price. Now, if you get a front loader, the problem with them is the door is so low you have to bend over. The door is close to the floor. Well, that's easy to fix. You get what's called a pedestal, and it'll raise the whole washing machine up, and you need one for the dryer so that they're at the same level. So you get the washer, the dryer, and two pedestals. Well, how much is a pedestal? Well, it's on sale right now at J.C. Penney, as I like to call them, J.C. Penney. How much? Well, it was $259. Now, $233. So you can get the pedestal for almost the price of a brand new top loader. And this is just a steel base. It's just to raise up the level of the front load washing machine. I think it's a ridiculous design. People that have them, that bought them years ago, hated them. Why? Because they would, when they go to spin, they'd walk across the floor. You'd have to anchor them down. It was just a ridiculous design. And it's computer controlled. Great. Another thing to go wrong. So I'm looking for simplicity. I'm looking for resistance to failure and resistance to planned obsolescence. But I don't know why people are buying these, front-load washing machines. By the time you pay for them, there's just no way that you can recover the cost through efficiency in my book. Any comments, Rich?
Well, simplicity and functionality are almost words of the past. you look at what's happening with some of these things you're talking about, planned obsolescence. I think the corporations have been telegraphing our future for quite some time. Mm-hmm. American corporations are leveraged to the hilt. They've got the highest debt level of U.S. GDP since 2008. Just the last 2 years, corporations issued another $1 trillion of new debt, okay, in the forms of bonds. And a lot of these things aren't for new expansion for business. It's not keeping the same business model. It's not for new products. It's not for new services. It's not for new people, but to boost earnings per share. And very few people benefit for that. Okay, share buybacks, dividends, executive cash, through stock options and acquisitions and mergers. That's all that's happening. So when you look at, when the consumer demands simplicity and functionality and elimination of planned obsolescence, how the heck can they get it when the companies aren't listening to the consumer and producing products that's going to benefit the masses? It looks to me like they're just trying to get out. We have a credit collapse. We have debt is on the increase on a current spending spree that's supposed to be in exchange for decline of future spending. Of course, unless incomes can pay back principal and interest, which is definitely not happening. So now debt's too consumptive, and they're not building commerce with those new monies. So that's the situation we're in. This is why self-sufficiency and doing things from the bottom up and giving ideas and solutions as we do to the people is the only thing left. Vince?
When you talk about companies are in business to increase share price, I believe you're absolutely correct. And I'm going to address that when we come back right after these few short commercial announcements. So, class, I was very fortunate in my early years. In 1970, I was offered a job at Sears Roebuck and Company. And the job that I was offered was one of being an auto mechanic. And I was assigned to the exhaust system muffler replacement bay. And so I was given the tools that I needed: an air hose attached to a compressor, an air hammer, air chisel, wrenches, sockets, those kinds of things. They even gave me a shirt, a uniform shirt. And I still have it to this day. It still fits. And anyway, it's a mechanic shirt. And I wear blue jeans with my mechanic shirt. And I was told that customer satisfaction was number one. And on the side of the Sears store at the time, they had a sign that said satisfaction guaranteed or your money back. Well, customer came in and the foreman assigned me the job to fix this exhaust system on this car. And the complaint was not that it leaked, not that the muffler had fallen off, but that it was just loud, just noisy. So the shop foreman said, Vinny, here's the part, here's the muffler. Would you put this muffler on? Here are the muffler clamps. So I took the old muffler off, put the new muffler on, bolted it, used the muffler clamps, lowered the car off of the lift, started it up. It sounded just like before. Exactly the same. It was still loud. So I told the shop foreman. He listened to it, and he said, okay, let's try a different muffler. He looked to make sure I put the inlet on the inlet side, the exhaust on the exhaust side, and everything was right, and it was hung right, and it was not my fault. So he said, let's try another muffler. There's something wrong with this muffler. Okay, so I took the muffler off, replaced it with the second muffler. Same thing. He said, well, there must be something wrong with our muffler, the Sears brand muffler. And it was $19.95 to put on this muffler with the part. So they ordered a muffler from the local auto supply place, a different brand. And by this time, I couldn't take it off without damaging the exhaust pipe. So now I had to replace two pipes, the one before the muffler or the one after the muffler, because of the process of installing and taking them off, it just couldn't take the process any longer. So I had to replace two more pipes. And I did that with a different brand muffler, and still the same thing. And the shop foreman said, wow, I've never seen this before. And he said to me, park the car over there in the parking lot. And he went over to the customer and he said, you know what, I'm really sorry. We've replaced the muffler with a Sears muffler, same thing that you had before, same noise. Replaced it with a second Sears muffler thinking that the first one was defective. We had the same problem. We went out and bought from an auto jobber a different brand of muffler and put on 2 new pipes for you. Still, we have the same problem. So I'm really sorry, but we cannot seem to fix your car. No charge for the muffler and the new exhaust system you have. We're really sorry. That was Sears. Now, let's fast forward to the 1990s. In the 1990s, I bought a tool called a timing light. I bought this because I worked at Sears. I kind of thought some of their tools were pretty darn good. So I bought a timing light for $100. I used it once, and this is the kind of, it's like a gun, and you point it at the vibration damper or harmonic balancer, and you can see where this spark is going to fire in relation to the position of the crankshaft. So it's kind of a light that flashes, a bright xenon light, and you hook up 3 wires to it, and you point the trigger. It's like kind of like a taser, and you point the light, and you make your adjustment, and you're done. So I did that, worked fine. Put it back in the plastic bag inside the original box. Put the box and the receipt in the my toolbox, my mechanic's toolbox. Went to use it 13 months later, and it didn't work. It was guaranteed for 12 months. I brought it back to Sears, and the salesman said, it's out of warranty. And I said, yeah, I know. But it's a Craftsman. And outside your door it says satisfaction guaranteed your money back. Or at least it used to. And the salesman said, we'll give you 10% off the replacement. I said, why would I want to do that? Why would I want one of these? And especially the way you're treating me. You didn't just give me a new one. And you didn't say, hey, I'm really sorry that it failed. Should have lasted a long time. Should have lasted your lifetime. Well, anyway, I got the store manager over, and he said something very profound to me. And I'm going to tell you what it is. Now, put into this context that I have a master's degree in business. I'm not trying to elevate my status. I'm just telling you that I was educated for 6 years in business, principles of business, every kind of business you could, any kind of way you could look at a business you could think of, except learning that the Federal Reserve is a private corporation. Except for that, I was taught in the old business ethics and ways. So the store manager said, you don't understand. We don't work for the customer. We don't do that anymore. We work for the shareholder.
Mm-hmm.
That was so profound. I couldn't believe it. You're kidding, right? You're not trying to make the best products for the customer so you can beat the competitors to get that revenue from the customers? You don't care about the customers? Are you serious? Serious. I am absolutely serious in what I'm telling you. He said, no, we don't work for the customer. We work for the shareholders. Now, what's the rest of the story? Sears is failing. One of the biggest and best retail institutions ever in the history of man is crumbling right in front of us. Why? Because they lost focus. They forgot that the customer is the reason for the business. It's not the shareholder, it's the customer. But they lost sight of that. Now, you'd have to drag me into a Sears store to make me buy something. I don't want to go to Sears. I used to love Sears. But they don't love me. They don't care about me. They don't care about selling me a product that they think is going to last. They're in the planned obsolescence business, just like everybody else. And it's, who cares about the customer? Not them. Tell me I'm wrong, Rich.
No, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, that's their alibi for not doing customer service, for not caring about quality. I mean, we put ourselves in a situation where we've actually exported inflation to low-cost producing countries. You can't expect quality of our goods to go up. They have to go down because...
It's not just them. I have a telephone provider, internet provider, CenturyLink. Well, I called them and said, hey, after our phone service was restored, after about a day of not having phone service, landline nor internet, I called them up and I said, what's going on? They said, well, let's do some tests. Where's this being done? Well, in the Philippines. The customer service and technical support's in the Philippines. And they're very nice there. They really are. Well, so what they tell me, you got a problem. You got a problem, and we're going to send a technician. And he was supposed to be here by 7 p.m. yesterday. So I'm waiting, because I've got cows, and I've got to let this guy in. So I'm waiting at the farm, wasting time, waiting for this guy. Does he call? No. So for 2 days, I'm waiting for him. Doesn't call, doesn't write, doesn't tell me he's not going to be here. So I called twice yesterday, talked to the Philippines, and they said, well, they're kind of busy. Yeah? And here's the problem. If there was any place I could go besides CenturyLink, I would. But they have a monopoly. There's no place for me to go. If I want a landline, it's them or nobody. I would leave them in a heartbeat. So, class, here's the only thing that you can do. You call them and you ask them for a discount for being loyal if you're one of their customers. Okay? And then, if they don't deliver, you tell them, hey, I want compensation because you didn't deliver. Now, when this guy finally shows up, I'm going to document it. Then I'm going to call CenturyLink again and say, I want a month free because I wasted a day plus of my time waiting for your guy. No call, no information that he wasn't going to show up, and he didn't show up. Now, I've done this in the past. When I've had a doctor's appointment and the doctor didn't show up, I sent him a bill. I sent the doctor a bill for me showing up and him not showing up for my appointment. Why? Because the doctors charge you, at least in Virginia, they would charge us $25 if you're late or $25 for a missed appointment. So I sent him a bill for $25 for not being in his office on the day I had an appointment. What happened? He fired me. He fired me as a patient. One of the best things that's ever happened to me. So I don't take it. I just don't take it. Now, there are consequences for doing the kind of stuff I do. There really are. Like being fired from your doctor, getting an F- in history at the college level. For saying, I stood up in class and I said, I didn't sign up for this class to hear derogatory names about nationalities. I didn't come here for that. I came here to learn history. What do I get? An F-. Impossible to get a lower grade than F-. It's impossible to get a lower grade than F, but I did. So there are consequences for the kind of things that I do, but I don't take it. Just to continue another short story, our son was traveling to a convention, and I let him use my turbo diesel Chevy truck, 1994. I went through it. Everything was fine. Called me up. He was out of state, and he said, hey, Dad, it's overheating. And I said, okay, here's what you do. And he knew what to do, pulled over. Got to a phone, called me, and I said, you got to take it to a Chevy dealer. So what does a Chevy dealer do? They flush the cooling system. They flush it. $500+. I'll tell you the rest of the story when we come back. So our son was traveling with my 1994 Chevy Blazer, and it was overheating. And I suggested that he go to a dealership, Chevy dealership, rather than some independent garage, because Chevy would know what to do about this. And I said, sounds like you've got a blown head gasket. So I told him to loosen the radiator cap because it was bubbling over. And if he waited till it cooled, he could probably get there. And so he did. And he called me up, and he said, well, they want to do a radiator flush. That's what will fix the problem. I said, okay. Doesn't sound like it to me. It sounds like a blown head gasket, but okay. That's what they say. Because they're there, I'm not there. And so we got the car radiator flushed. He drove it away, and the bill was over $500. Now, what are we talking about? We're talking about $20 worth of antifreeze and flushing the old antifreeze out. And the mechanic, broke a pipe nipple on the engine, and they had to replace that. And it took 3 hours because he broke this metal pipe. And so over $500 for what would have been a $20 antifreeze purchase if I did it myself, and I would not have broken the pipe. And I found out later on that the pieces of the pipe, big chunks of it, the size of pennies, were still floating around in the engine, which I removed later. But bottom line is it still had the same problem, even after it was worked on. So I called the service manager, and I said, we still have the same problem. And by the way, $500 for a antifreeze flush and refill? And he said, yeah. I said, are you serious? He said, yeah. I said, would you like to adjust the price? He said, no. Okay. So I said, all right. So I called the sales manager. Now, why would I call the sales manager? Well, I called him because he's selling new cars on the floor, and I said, hey, I just want to let you know that the guy in the service department, the service manager, is destroying your business because he's ripping people like me off. And here's what he did. And I explained it. Sales manager ends the phone call with me. Next thing I know, I get a call from GCN. Yeah, the radio network we're on, Genesis Communications Network. And they said that the CEO of the Chevy dealership called and threatened GCN with a lawsuit, if I say anything on the air about this event. Yeah. So I called the CEO of the Chevy dealership. And I said who I was. And I said, here's the situation. What would you like to do? Because whatever we work out on this phone call is what I'm going to say on the air. If we work nothing out, I'm going to talk about it. If we work something out, I'm going to talk about it. Whatever it is, I'm going to talk about it. And you can call in. What do you want to do? He said, let's split it. I said, okay, that's what we'll do. We split it. He reduced the price, sent me a refund, and I talked about it. What I'm saying is, I'm saying a lot of things here, all in one little story, one little rant. First of all, there are mechanics who wear uniforms that are incompetent, in my opinion. He should have known it was a blown head gasket. It's an easy test. Very easy. When the engine's cold, you start it up, you look at bubbles coming out of the radiator cap. If you see them, blown head gasket. It's that simple. Okay? So they ripped us off, in my opinion. They did work that was not necessary, and they didn't fix the problem. Got a call yesterday, last evening. Someone I know, who will remain nameless, is stranded out of state. They're in a vehicle, and this Ford vehicle was stumbling. It's really cold out. They brought it to the Ford dealer. Ford dealer said, can't help you. Brought it to another Ford dealer. Can't help you. Called another one. Can't help you. Brought it to Firestone. Firestone said, $2,800. We're going to change the spark plugs, and we're going to replace the couple ignition coils, and we're going to clean the EGR valve, $2,800. It's a 2004 truck. The truck's worth $3,000, $2,800 to get it back on the road. Don't let this happen to you. Make sure that a vehicle that you're in is roadworthy. Those are my comments. Rich Scheben, 10 seconds?
Well,
time's up.
I think business is going to change. Thanks for giving me so much time, Vince. With consumer debt growing faster than GDP and debt climbing much faster than wages, things are going to change.